Kathy Schultz, Dean of the School of Education, and I want to welcome you to the 10th set of talks in our ongoing series of CU Boulder School of Education Ed Talks. What a wonderful milestone. If I could see, I would be so delighted to see so many of people here tonight, so many new people, as well as our friends and community who have attended this great event in the past many, many times. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful spring evening and taking time to explore a set of critical educational topics with us. We're excited for you to hear the wonderful speakers and activists tonight who are part of our extended School of Education community and who have done incredible work toward justice in educational settings in the past, present, and into the future. Our Ed Talks are based on the TED Talk model. We started this tradition to draw more community members, including local educators, into our work and to provide a space for our own CU Boulder community to come together to listen to and learn from one another. Whether live or virtual, our goal is that our audience emerges more informed, passionate, and engaged with critical and consequential questions and issues that arise from and motivate our work. Our idea for the Ed Talks was to translate our research, teaching, and community-engaged work to make it accessible to a wider audience, to you who are here. We hope to generate conversations about issues we care about deeply. We always learn so much from these moments. We learn more about each other, the purposes and meaning of our work that we do and that we love. So tonight, our theme is civil rights and our collective work toward freedom. I recently read Imani Perry's wonderful book, South to Home, where she writes about her journey to several states in the South and reflects on their difficult histories, her relatives, and connections to the land, and the beauty and joy, as well as difficulties in the place she calls home. Her parents were both activists in the civil rights movement, and while she doesn't directly speak about that time period, she writes about the importance of freedom dreams, explaining that these dreams rest on both imagination and resistance. Tonight, we will hear both of these concepts, imagination and resistance, woven throughout the talks. Our speakers will share several different stories tonight that describe instances of discrimination and harm, as well as possibility and hope. The moments of hope don't erase the pain. Instead, they begin to create understanding that provides possible pathways toward freedom. Tonight's talk brings together events and ideas from the historical past that inform our current and often troubling times, raising questions that I imagine we will all think about well past this evening. These talks invite us to think about what each of us can do to fight for freedom and work toward a better and more just world. So welcome to our talks. Our first speaker is Tanya Hogan. Tanya Hogan is Dr. Tanya Hogan is Executive Director of the Bueno Center for Multicultural Education in the School of Education at the University of Colorado Boulder. A native Spanish speaker born in Acapulco, Mexico, Tanya has over 25 years of experience in teaching bilingual students, facilitating professional learning, coordinating teacher education programs, and teaching undergraduate and graduate courses. She is currently leading Bueno in new and exciting directions that include this summer an institute in Puebla, Mexico. Please join me in welcoming Tanya.
I was born where my parents met in Acapulco, Mexico. My mom, who is Hungarian and French, spoke English and French, while my dad, who is Mexican, spoke Spanish and had just begun to study English at his university. Despite the language obstacles in the beginning, their love, perseverance, and love for language has deeply influenced my own journey. When I was 5 years old, we moved from Acapulco to Aston, Pennsylvania, a small suburb outside of Philly. My mom's pediatrician from Mexico had advised my parents to only speak Spanish with me at home for fear that speaking in more than one language would confuse my language learning. We now know that's a myth, and research shows the cognitive and academic benefits of learning more than one language at a time. My parents listened to the pediatrician, and my dad made it a rule that only Spanish was to be spoken at home. In school in Pennsylvania, I was an extremely shy and introverted student. Not only was I shy, but we were also the only Spanish-speaking Mexican family in the whole school. For the first few years of school, I passed as being just like the other students. I avoided speaking, often resorting to whispering when I had to repeat something. I learned to mimic what other students were doing and saying, and I relied on nonverbal cues to understand what was being said. I avoided doing anything that would get me in trouble or cause me to have to speak or participate. No one realized that I actually didn't understand English. When I reached third grade, however, I wasn't able to hide anymore. The class was much more participatory, with students being called on to read out loud or answer questions for the entire class. It became clear I wasn't reading or comprehending what was going on in class, and I was often in my own world. My teacher became frustrated and sometimes angry with me. My desk was even moved next to hers, and she often held up my work that had not been done correctly for others to see. Finally, when she realized I wasn't responding to my name, but she was calling me Tania, not Tanya, she called my parents and told them she wanted me tested for special education because she suspected I may be autistic. My parents came into the school to meet with her and explained to her that I spoke a lot at home and never had trouble following directions or responding in Spanish. That's when she realized it wasn't about ability or intelligence, it was about language. At the time, ESL bilingual education was not offered at this school. I was placed in speech class to improve my English pronunciation and projection of my voice, but there were no interventions or attempts to build my language or vocabulary. Later on in my career, I would realize that several of my civil rights as an emerging bilingual student had been violated. Fortunately, in fourth grade, I was blessed with my favorite teacher, Mr. Phillips, who was kind, supportive, and genuinely cared about me. He also happened to be the only teacher of color I would have in my K-12 schooling. He helped me to improve my English, learn to not only read, but to love reading. And I would call my parents after school to update them on my progress. Although we moved around a lot during my schooling, Mr. Phillips continued to write supportive and encouraging letters. And it was because of him that I started to think I wanted to be a teacher. And I began to teach my stuffed animals and my sister at home. In high school, I was still afraid to speak in front of people. I couldn't get up in front of the class and deliver a speech without turning bright red, and I struggled to project my voice. In college, my public speaking professor told me that I would never be able to become a teacher because of my difficulties with public speaking, and encouraged me to think about a different profession. I refused to be discouraged and persevered, fueled by my passion to be like Mr. Phillips and prove everyone wrong. I did go on and become a bilingual teacher. In front of my students, I could be my authentic self, and I didn't feel like people were judging me. I didn't get embarrassed, turn bright red, or feel like I needed to whisper. I loved teaching, and I loved the passion for learning that my students and I shared. I made it a priority to infuse culture and language into our classroom community. And in spite of many other challenges, we created our own beautiful, empowering bilingual learning world where we could focus on our studies without worrying about anything else outside of our classroom. However, about 7 years later, I stepped out of my classroom to become a bilingual reading interventionist and instructional facilitator, and was working with pre-service teachers, and I began to see education in a different light. I witnessed unequal access to resources, a curriculum that focused solely on Eurocentric values, racial biases, and inequitable instructional practices from teacher to teacher and school to school. I realized that what was happening outside of our classroom absolutely impacted us, and I had made a mistake by not engaging and talking openly about those injustices in my classroom with my students. I knew I needed to improve and change my teaching and start to speak out about these injustices, in spite of my fear of public speaking. One afternoon, our instructional superintendent visited our school to talk to us about our performance ratings. He stood up in front of our staff and presented data indicating that we were not performing well according to the district's frameworks. As I listened, I realized that the data had been manipulated by excluding certain test scores where we as a school had demonstrated growth and progress, making us appear much worse off than we actually were. As he spoke, I desperately wanted to get up and challenge what he was saying, but my lifelong anxiety with speaking in public was so strong that my body grew tense and my stomach tightened. I could hardly breathe, but I managed to speak the words that needed to be asked. I said, "You've observed and worked with our teachers. You've seen what our students are producing. Do you agree with how the data is being presented, or will you support us and challenge the district?" I was shaking while I spoke. I'm sure my voice cracked, but I was able to get the words out. To my disappointment, but not surprise, the instructional superintendent talked around my question and ended the meeting abruptly. Later, my principal was told to control your staff because of my comments. The moment of speaking truth to power was a turning point for me. Even though it didn't help the outcome for the school, I found a voice I didn't realize was there. And as Audre Lorde says, the transformation of silence into language and action is an act of self-revelation and always seems fraught with danger. We fear the visibility without which we cannot truly live. Yet being seen, being valued, is a fundamental aspect of human dignity and well-being, connected to our human rights. I worked for Denver Public Schools in different roles for 18 years before making a big change to working in higher education and pursuing a doctoral degree. My research focused on Latinx pre-service students and how they navigated unjust systems, policies, and processes while attending college and school-based internships. In particular, I looked at the different types of resistance. Positive resistance, such as resilient resistance and transformational resistance. I wanted to know how students' critiques of social oppression and motivation of social justice supported them in positive resistance towards unjust school systems and policies. One of my students, Dolores, who was part of my research study, always stopped by my office to talk to me before her classes, and we would check in with how school, her internships, and just life were going. One day, she talked about how frustrated and angry she was feeling in one of her classes when the students, primarily white students, would share stories about the Latinx children and communities they were working with. They often spoke about them in a deficit-based way. These poor kids, they lack this, they lack that, they won't catch up, their families don't care. Dolores said, "They don't realize they're actually talking about me. I'm from the same community. If I'm going to be a teacher, I have to learn to speak for myself and for my kids." Well, not in that white savior way, but showing them that we have a connection. We grew up and we speak the same way. Dolores wanted to say something so badly, but instead, she chose to be silent and not participate in class anymore. Over the next couple of weeks, her frustration grew. In each conversation with me, she would analyze the entire class discussion, and she would rehearse what she should have said or what she might do next time. Finally, towards the end of the semester, she had the courage to speak up, and she challenged those stereotypical ways of thinking that were being portrayed in the classroom. Instead of feeling silenced and marginalized, she found her voice. She spoke up, and she pushed back. Resistance in classroom is sometimes seen as self-defeat or acting out. When students complain about injustices they experience, the reactions from others can range from being dismissive or defensive to denying the validity of their experience, and at times, even branding them as entitled. What if we looked more deeply and saw the various forms of resistance from our students, from silence and disengagement to arguing, as an indication that there might be conflict or struggle? A struggle against injustice, oppression, and silencing. I am now fortunate to find myself in a place professionally where my passion for equity, social justice, civil rights, and culturally and linguistically diverse students intersects in a serendipitous way. And I still don't like public speaking, but I do it anyway to help create opportunities and access for others. It has been a long road to get here. As a child, I became invisible because I didn't speak English until a teacher saw me and heard me and inspired me to become a teacher. And in spite of who told me I couldn't do it, I resisted and I persisted. Overcoming obstacles, fighting for one's agency and voice are the beginnings and fundamental aspects of civil rights movements. Whether it be through resisting, acts of protest, civil disobedience, or simply refusing to accept the status quo, the fight for civil rights requires a deep sense of resilience, determination, and hope. I end with a call to action. As you interact with your students and colleagues, encourage them to share more stories and experiences about themselves, and just listen. Then help nurture and cultivate a path towards transformational resistance through dialogue, collaboration, and collective action. When a student, a colleague, or a friend engages in any kind of resistance, listen closely to the smallest whisper or the loudest scream. It is a call for equity. It is a call for justice. It is a call to action. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Your life story and activism are inspirational. We are lucky to have your voice in our school. Our next speaker is Emily Gleason. Dr. Emily Gleason is Faculty Director of the Teacher Leadership Program, Senior Instructor in the Learning Sciences and Human Development Program at CU Boulder School of Education, and a faculty affiliate for the Renee Crown Wellness Institute. She has worked with university community partnerships in urban and rural areas for 20 years and has a strong commitment to listening and learning from community members, particularly youth and educators. Emily worked with teachers to co-design the online teacher leadership program, bringing in educators from rural Colorado to ensure that this innovative program reflects their needs and desire. Please join me in welcoming Emily.
Back in 2015, I was living and teaching in a small town in southern Vermont called Rutland. It's there that I became an accidental expert in refugee rights. It's there when I learned what happens when our desire to be welcoming crashes into "not in my backyard." Rutland is actually the second biggest town in the state of Vermont with a population of close to 16,000 people. But it's a funny mixture of rural and urban with a declining population and an opioid problem. Outsiders sometimes call Rutland Rut Vegas, which locals hate, because of the strip malls that line the one main highway that cuts across the top of the town. But just like so many historic New England towns, much of life takes place on the local square, on the green at the town center. This is where the art fairs and the winter fests take place, where summer concerts pulse with energy. This is where life happens. Walking around Rutland, you'll see a quaint coffee shop, a bookstore, and a statue of Martin Freeman, a renowned African-American abolitionist who was born and raised in Rutland, Vermont. Though today, the Black population in Rutland is just about 1.4%, according to the census. It's a town that's in the midst of reclaiming itself as a place to be, with signs that say, "I love Rutland," fluttering on signposts and on banners above doorways. Homeless encampments are not far from stately Victorian houses with wraparound porches. Poverty meets wealth on the same block in this small town in southern Vermont. As an educator trained in urban education, I took my first professor position at a small state school outside of Rutland called Castleton State University. And I worked with local rural educators and first-gen, predominantly white college students. I loved teaching at Castleton, though I routinely felt frustrated that some of my students continued to resist conversations related to anti-racism and cultural literacies, as they felt those issues just weren't relevant to their white monolingual contexts. Yet I was also inspired by the strength of the families, the communities living in rural Vermont, many of whom were underserved, overlooked, and mistreated for years by generational poverty, disenfranchisement from job opportunities, and schools that came up short. Many of the people I met in and around Rutland were similar to the people in my previous home community of Oakland, California. Many were enmeshed in systemic inequalities so great that they were suffering from alcoholism or a lack of fresh food or a lack of access to medical care. And just like the families in Oakland, who defied categorization as urban, the families in small-town Vermont, whether categorized as rural or not, were resourceful, innovative, connected, and also misrepresented. In Oakland, as in Rutland, big divides between the haves and the have-nots persisted. And this divide became evident, even volatile, when Rutland proposed to take in refugees during the Syrian war. In 2015, the Syrian war displaced millions in a matter of months, and by 2016, 6 million people had crossed borders seeking asylum. As the world was taken with images of refugee children, the mayor of Rutland quietly applied to the U.S. government for Rutland to serve as a refugee relocation center for Syrian citizens needing asylum. This was an attempt to address the town's declining population and to step in amidst one of the worst humanitarian crises of the century. A few months later, the mayor announced that Rutland would soon be a relocation site for 100 Syrian families. Meanwhile, all over the country, people opened their hearts and their homes and their wallets to try to support Syrians in crisis. In Rutland, at least half the town mobilized instantly to begin collecting goods and household supplies, and within months, thousands of items had been collected to welcome the new families. Couches, cars, microwaves, dishes, dolls, snowsuits, you name it. People came out in droves to support the Syrians. On the other hand, another part of the community became incensed by the proposition of Rutland becoming a refugee relocation site for Muslim asylum seekers. A group sprung up overnight called Rutland First, naming itself after Trump's hallmark campaign, America First. Rutland First members protested the mayoral decision to make Rutland a relocation site. As solidarity marches at the town square began to take place, Rutland First protesters showed up across the street, sometimes with rifles and Confederate flags. Many in this population had been out of work and down on their luck, and now, out of the blue, talks of job opportunities for Syrians and plans to revitalize neighborhoods took hold. This did not go down easy. Long-standing conflicts about race and class, borders and belonging, conflicts that stretch back to the earliest days of the United States and before, simmered in the public square as rallies for and against refugee resettlement in Rutland took hold. As a professor of education, I saw an opportunity to fill a gap, and I quickly developed a plan to teach a course for local teachers who recognized that many, if not most, had not been trained to support culturally and ethnically and linguistically diverse children in their classrooms. In developing the curriculum, I drew on the expertise of the community who could help us learn about Syria and refugee contexts globally, such as a history professor friend who studied the Middle East and other community organizers who worked with transnational populations in nearby cities. I invited youth who had escaped war-torn contexts to come and share from their experience. In the first semester of the course, we delved deeply into the complexities of race, class, and nationalism in our own classrooms in Vermont. One teacher shared that his 7th graders were riled up about the Syrian families who were set to arrive in Rutland. He explained that a student had declared that very day, "When they get here, I'm just going to shoot them up. They don't belong here and they are not welcome." The teacher, close to tears, confessed that he had no idea what to do or say or how to intervene, and as a result, he let the moment pass. We sat in silence collectively that night, collectively feeling what it means to look violence in the eye, knowing how daunting the task of making each other human really is and can be. We rehearsed what the teacher could have said to the student and the class and how he might have responded. Teachers also took positive action and leadership, partially as a result of the class. Some reevaluated their own curriculum to include more diverse voices and histories from around the world and around the country. Other teachers mobilized at the school and district level for greater supports for teachers related to equity and anti-racism in the school system. Around town, anger continued to bubble up at the edges of the green. Sometimes pickup trucks would circle the square, sporting large American flags with drivers shouting things like, "Rutland first," or "Not in my town." But many, many more people gathered in the square, even on bitter, cold days with signs that read, "All are welcome," and "We are all immigrants." Along with the conflict, there was collective warmth, energy, and hope. In the end, due to the Muslim ban put in place in January of 2017, only 3 Syrian families arrived in Rutland. Fortunately, they are thriving in Vermont today. And currently, Rutland is preparing to receive a number of Afghan refugees looking to be resettled. This would not likely have been possible without the groundwork that was laid in 2015 and 2016 in the town square, the coffee shop, and the classrooms. The struggle and conversations then paved the way for the welcome today. I left Rutland in 2018 and now teach at the School of Education here in Boulder, Colorado. I often see signs on my mostly white, middle to upper middle class neighbors' lawns that say, "Refugees, welcome here." I applaud this impulse, and I wonder about the reality. In spite of the conflict I saw in Rutland and the tensions that continue today at the national scale about personal rights, immigrant rights, and refugee rights, I do believe that welcoming is possible. I believe that if we continue to work to create communities that welcome rather than divide, if we commit to struggle together, we may begin to grow together, to learn together, and to cultivate more spaces of belonging that are rich in diversity, imagination, and possibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Your vision and understanding of how communities learn to welcome and create spaces of belonging is so important for all of our work. Our next speaker is Jason Romero. Jason Romero Jr. is from Pueblo, Colorado, with deep roots in the mountains of northern New Mexico. As an undergraduate student, Jason created a CATSA, Youth Leadership Education and Empowerment Program, and has guided the program over the past 10 years. Since 2014, Jason has been a Chicano studies teacher in Southwest Denver, and in 2020 became director of the Chicano and Latino History Project at CU Boulder. Please join me in welcoming Jason.
You look at me, and what do you see? Un vato loco. But what does that mean? Because all the vatos I've ever seen on TV have been killers, drug dealers, and gangbangers. So is that the way society sees me? When I watch the movies, or even the news, the ones that look like me are always dressed in prison hues, incarcerated, for life, por vida. That's me. Why not? It's already what they think, so I'll give them what they want. End up with my arms and legs cuffed, linked. Cufflinks. Like I could ever dream of that. I was destined for La Pinta. But why, might I ask? Is it because we're really worse people? Chale, that's stupid. It's because the society in which we all live tells me I'm inferior because of my money and my skin. They make us believe it by criminalizing our language, actions, histories, clothes, and all. They pass these damn laws that end up with us locked up playing handball. So why not mess around and be with my people? I'll let that guard tower be my only steeple. But you see, to allow our community to be criminalized is to allow our minds and bodies to be colonized. And to accept it is to just flow in the pipeline. But still we drop out and say, I'll do it in my own time. But I know, in the back of my mind, I can't do that. Or I'll end up locked up, in and out, always doing time. Looking at this, I don't want to waste my life. I don't want to see cell bars every day of my life. But that's what they think I'm destined for, a life full of strife. And so now, I fight real hard and represent my people. So don't treat me like the devil, puro evil. You see, I always went to class and did my work too. And look at me now, a vato, graduated, back, teaching in school. So you look at me, and what do you see? Un vato loco. But what does that mean? I grew up in Pueblo, with roots that run deep into the mountains of northern New Mexico. My family didn't have to cross any borders to get here. We were already here when these man-made borders were drawn and when they were moved. This historical connection to the land of what we now call the U.S. Southwest is something that provides me a sense of self, a sense of identity, a sense of Chicanismo. Chicanismo can roughly be understood as the sense of being Chicano, and this was the identity that colored my experience growing up. From embarking on a pilgrimage every Good Friday to the Santuario de Chimayo in New Mexico, to growing up with our family lowrider in the garage, Chicanismo was embedded in my experience before I even knew what that meant. As a young person, my academic identity was that of a voracious learner. I loved to read, and I would spend hours a day consuming information and trying to make sense of the world around me. As an elementary school student, this was typically encouraged, and most of my teachers from that time pushed and supported me. I never felt as though my personal and academic identities were in conflict until I was a bit older. One of the first significant memories I have of high school happened before my freshman year even began. When I received my initial schedule for the upcoming year, there were a couple changes I wanted to make. Namely, I wanted to enroll in more honors level courses. And so my mom and I, we went to the school, and we met with the counselor that I was assigned to. And I told her about those changes that I wanted to make to my schedule. And almost immediately, she began telling me how hard these classes were going to be, and about how things were so much more difficult in high school than they were in middle school. And if I really wanted to do this, I would need to buckle down and not prioritize sports like basketball. Now, I didn't even play basketball. But the point she was trying to make was extremely clear, that her expectations of me were low, and that in her mind, there was no way I would be able to handle the workload of an honors level student. So my mom let her know what was up. She asked that counselor if she had even seen my transcripts. And as she turned around, she saw the courses I had already taken, both as a middle school student and at the high school as a middle school student. And her whole demeanor changed. She made those changes. On the ride home, my mom and I talked about what had happened and how what I had just experienced in that high school counselor's office was an example of the type of racism and discrimination that would populate my experience from that point forward. The following year, I had the opportunity to attend a Latino leadership program that brought together Latinas and Latinos from all across Latin America to engage in a powerful learning and leadership experience. At this program was one of the first times that I felt an intense pride in my cultural identity, and seeing so many people who were like me and who are doing amazing things in their community was a transformational experience. It gave me hope that I could also be part of this incredible legacy that had been and continues to be laid. But I never heard the word Chicano. I grew with and I transformed alongside people who identified as Latino. And while we were absolutely related and connected, I also felt like it wasn't quite my identity. I am a Chicano. And so I was inspired to learn what that meant. I spent countless hours over the next several years reading outside of school and at the library and at the park and in the parking lot of the community college where I was taking classes at just 16 years old. And I began to learn not just what it means to be a Chicano, but also about the historical and contemporary struggles of Chicana, Chicano, and indigenous peoples. I learned the story of UMAS and how people had fought so that I would have the opportunity to come to a university and be educated. I learned about Los Seis de Boulder, Luis Jr. Martinez, Ricardo Falcón, and Carlos Zapata, the martyrs of Colorado's Chicano movement. I began to understand myself and my community in the larger context of history. And I decided to come here to CU Boulder. And it was here that I became more heavily involved in organizing and activism. It was here that I came to the realization that my community was dealing with many of the same issues we had been organizing around since the 1960s and even before. And it was here that I fully realized how separated the university was from my community. It was because of this realization that a small group of umaceros and mechistas began organizing to recreate that link to the community through the development of Aquetza, youth leadership, education, and community empowerment. Aquetza, a Nahuatl word meaning to lift your chin up, is one of the most powerful and transformative experiences that I have ever had the honor of being a part of. Every summer, we bring between 50 and 60 students from around Colorado to the CU Boulder campus for one intense and transformative week of reflection, learning, and skill building, before sending them back into their communities with our staff at their side for a second week of creation, where students formulate and work to implement their Olin projects, their movement projects, and seek to create and sustain positive social change in their own communities. Because of our collective creation of Aquetza, I was given the opportunity to become a teacher while getting my master's here in the School of Education. And in 2014, after our second summer of the program, I began to teach at a high school in southwest Denver, where I continue to teach Chicano studies to this day. And while the students that I work with come from a complex variety of backgrounds, our explorations of Chicanismo, Latinidad, and indigeneity reveal the need for educators to look beyond surface-level identity markers to fully embrace the complex identities and histories that make up our communities. So I want to leave you with the question. When you look at me, what do you see? An educated vato? A future PhD? How about a manifestation of my people's history? Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. We learned so much from you when you speak truth to power and how you embrace your Chicanismo. Our final speakers are Ruben Donato and Judge Martin Gonzalez, who will speak about a little-known chapter in educational civil rights. Certain moments have been iconic symbols of the civil rights movement. Brown v. Board of Education in 1954 and the fight to end segregated schooling evoke images of young people like Ruby Bridges in the Little Rock Nine, tearing down racial barriers. Struggles against school segregation are memorialized in textbooks and curriculum. But Mexican Americans have a long-standing but lesser-known history in the struggle against school segregation. Their talk today begins to correct that history. Dr. Ruben Donato is a professor of Education Foundations Policy and Practice in our School of Education. This will be his 30th year teaching in our school. Yeah. He studies the historical dimensions of educational inequality and focuses on the educational experiences of Mexican Americans in the United States. He was recently selected to give the 2022-23 Distinguished Research Lecture, which was amazing, and which is among the most esteemed honors bestowed by the University of Colorado Boulder, and only the second time a faculty member from the School of Education has received this honor. Judge Martin Gonzalez is a fourth-generation resident of the San Luis Valley. He was the first Hispanic county judge for Alamosa County and the first Hispanic judge for the 12th Judicial District, the DeSantis Valley, both in Colorado. Judge Gonzalez served as a Conejos County Attorney and the Costilla County Attorney for many years, in addition to maintaining an extensive private civil practice. He is presently on the 12th Judicial Community Corrections Board, 12th Judicial Juvenile Services Committee, and the 12th Judicial Access to Justice Committee. Please join me in welcoming Ruben and Martin.
In 2014, my colleague, Professor Gonzalo Guzman, found a story in an obscure newspaper in Wyoming. It was about how Mexican Americans were challenging school segregation in Alamosa in 1914. The story, however, was vague. It did not give details. Professor Guzman and I had a conversation. After contacting the Alamosa County Courthouse to see if such case existed, the clerk said she would conduct a search.
I remember when the academics wanted access to the case file. Even though I'm a district court judge in Alamosa, I knew nothing about the case. After getting the request, I authorized a search of the archives for the case file. Frankly, given how old it was, I was surprised we found it. Recognizing what the case meant, I kept a copy, and we sent the documents off to the academics, who later on published an article in the Journal of Latinos in Education. I read it. That's when I directed my research attorney to contact Ruben. The case, Francisco Maestas et al., versus George Schoen et al. Appears to be one of the earliest Mexican-American challenges to school segregation in the United States, if not the earliest. The Maestas case took place in Alamosa, my hometown. I'm a fourth-generation Hispano to the San Luis Valley, with roots in New Mexico going back centuries. I'm the first Hispanic district judge appointed to the 12th Judicial District. As such, I'm a successor judge to the judge that ruled in the case. This historical context explains why the case was important to me. The struggle that led to the case began when Francisco Maestas and his family moved to the north side, the Anglo side of town in Alamosa. Mr. Maestas wanted to send his son Miguel to the school closest to his home, the North Side School. Miguel was denied admission to that school. Instead, the school officials ordered Mr. Maestas to enroll his son in the Mexican school, where all Mexicanos were required to attend. This school, the Mexican school, was further from his home and across the tracks.
Mr. Maestas made several complaints to school officials. His complaints fell on deaf ears. As a result, the Mexican-American community organized. They staged a boycott, and with the help of a local priest, they raised money in the community, and they hired an attorney from Denver. They hired Raymond Sullivan.
This case is unique because Mexican-American plaintiffs, my gente, maintained their children were being denied admission to the white school. Why? Because they were racially distinct as Mexicanos. That this was segregation. That this was illegal because the Colorado Constitution prohibited classifying and distinguishing public school children on the basis of color and race.
Defendants, school board members, and a superintendent, in response, argued that Mexican-American children were Caucasian. They said that Mexican-American children were no different than other white children in the school district. The legal construction of race for Mexican-Americans had a complicated history in the United States. It was complicated because the American government granted American citizenship to Mexicans living in the newly seceded territory after the U.S.-Mexican War in 1848, an area that included Alamosa. The naturalization of Mexican citizens suggested they had white status because naturalization was limited to white persons during that time.
The school board and superintendent argued they were not segregating Mexican-American students based upon race, but that it was appropriate to segregate them based upon language. That non-English speaking Mexican-American children required specialized education in a separate building. However, Judge Holbrook found that the school officials were in fact sending all Mexican-American students to the Mexican school, regardless of their English language abilities.
The judge, in fact, had Mexican-American children come to the courtroom when the case was being tried. They had an interpreter. When the interpreter asked questions to the Mexican-American children in Spanish, the children immediately responded in English before the interpreter finished asking the questions. The children were bilingual. They were Americans. They had deep roots in southern Colorado and northern New Mexico. Judge Charles Holbrook ruled in favor of Francisco Maestas in 1914. The judge decided the school officials could not prevent English-speaking Mexican-American children from attending schools of their choice. Miguel and his classmates were allowed to attend schools that were closer to their homes.
The Maestas case appears to be the first successful Mexican-American challenge to school segregation in the United States. Its importance seems self-evident, but sadly unknown. We've formed a committee made up of academics, lawyers, judges, descendants of the Maestas family, and community members, and we've begun the work to tell the world about the case. To date, we have been interviewed by NBC News, Rocky Mountain PBS, Colorado Public Radio, and featured in the National Parks magazine. In 2022, the Colorado legislature, by joint resolution, recognized the Maestas case as an important event in Colorado history. The committee to commemorate the case hired a well-known artist, Reginaldo Sonny Rivera, to sculpt a relief depicting the case. This relief was placed in the entrance to the Alamosa Courthouse on October 1st of 2022, an event witnessed by a standing room only crowd. A traveling statue was also created, which will be placed in various locations throughout Colorado. We, along with many individuals, especially those with roots to the San Luis Valley, celebrate this historic but forgotten case.
Thinking back, I am grateful that Judge Gonzalez brought people together and formed a committee. I am honored to be part of a group that understands the importance of this case. I consider this project to be one of the proudest moments in my professional career, to be part of a project that brought history to life.
Sadly, most people in the United States learn a history that does not mention or understand our Hispano heritage in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. We've been forged out of relative isolation, surviving drought, poverty, and the benign neglect of Spanish, Mexican, and United States political systems. Out of this, we became culturally unique and came to understand the importance of education to our survival. The Maestas case underscores how important education is to us and the willingness of my gente to organize against great adversity to achieve equal education. It shows our hope. It shows our inspiration. It shows our certainty that we Hispanos are meaningful to this ever more complex society.
We want to end with a corrido. A corrido is a popular Mexican musical tale that forms a ballad. Corridos are often about oppression, history, violence, and socially relevant topics. Dr. Antonio Esquivel wrote a corrido about the Francisco Maestas case and will perform a short version of this ballad.
In 1914, in Alamosa pasó the fight with the school. Don Francisco ganó. Alamosa had two schools donde tenían que andar. Miguel and his sister traques tenían que cruzar. From Denver, the lawyer, Sullivan les contestó, I will help you in your fight y el pleito comenzó. In March of that year, Judge Holbert declaró, attend the nearest school. Y así lo mando yo.
So thank you, Ruben and Martine and Antonio and all of our amazing speakers. Please come back to the stage and we'll applaud you again. So there's more. Now it's time for the question and answer session. So we're going to take questions and answers, questions from you and answers from them, questions from the audience, and we'll have mic runners coming around, so just raise your hand. I'll begin by asking the first question, which is for Tanya. What are some of the most important ways educators can support the youngest emergent bilingual students today?
I would say that you have to use culturally sustaining instructional practices in the classroom. I think in schools right now, there's too much assimilation and a standardization, and we have to value culture, language, and incorporate that into the curriculum and the ways of being, and value collectivism over individualism. And I think that's one of the most important ways. For emerging bilinguals, the other thing is to keep high expectations paired with high support, so to support them within that context of care. And then you have to be good at knowing how to differentiate and scaffold for language and to meet students' needs. So I would say those.
Thank you. So now it's questions from all of you. You should feel free to ask questions to a single person or to anybody in the group, to several people in the group. So let's see if I can see. You have any questions? Great. Okay, then we'll come back. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? I don't know if this is...
Yeah, just play with how you hold it.
Okay, so I used to be an educator, and I've always dreamt of a bilingual education system for the whole U.S. so that every child could access bilingual education in the many linguistic communities that we have in this country. And the pushback I always get is there's not enough resources to make that happen. That's just not possible. So this question's to anyone in the panel, but how do you respond to that, I guess, statement that there's not enough resources to support our linguistically diverse students?
Okay, I'll take it then. I feel like, again, if we started earlier with bilingualism and had more dual language programs and more people became bilingual, then we'd have the teachers that could be bilingual teachers. So oftentimes there are shortages in resources of bilingual teachers, but I think the resources are there. If they really wanted to do it, they just need to allocate the funds to go there. So it's also I think it goes back to who values what by what, who's multilingualism is being valued, because if it's a white student learning an additional language, it's encouraged and valued. But if it's a native language speaker maintaining their language and learning English, then that's the one they want to cut. And so, again, I don't think it's a real problem. I think it's a shift in mindset that has to happen in the United States.
Thank you. There's a question over here.
Can I add?
Okay.
To Judge Gonzalez, if there is a solution that you see in the law for the same problem?
The law is a strange animal, isn't it? There are good laws and bad laws. The good law that the Colorado Constitution had in 1912 produced the result in this case. That particular provision has been altered a bit, and it's not real clear it would still follow. So, my answer to that question really is, laws are the reflection of society's values. And so, to the extent that society struggles for good laws, we're going to have good results. And so, from my perspective, it's always a question of struggle, a struggle for what is good, and it's not going to be easy. The Alamosa case, there was only about 180 Mexicanos in Alamosa. The newspapers, the authorities, the school district, the state of Colorado district individuals and authorities were all against them, but they prevailed.
Thank you.
This question is for Judge Gonzalez and for Mr. Romero. I believe that when I call myself a Hispanic or a Latino or Latinx, I'm being very disrespectful to my Mexicanism and my Chicanismo. What say you?
You're talking to probably one of two judges in the state of Colorado that actually refers to himself as Chicano. I use the term Hispano because, frankly, the generation that goes older than me and many of the other individuals relate more concretely to that representation, that label, rather than the more political connotation of Chicano. ¿No lo quiere?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I feel very similar to Judge Gonzalez. For me growing up, Chicano, that was just the word that we used. Like Latino, Hispanic, those words were not something that we referred to ourselves as because we had those deep ancestral roots here in what we now call the United States. And so for me, yeah, Chicano has always been the word that I've preferred, even in spaces like the university, even as I've left the university and gone into community and been in schools where today Latino is the word, right? Like that's the umbrella term that they use to try and encompass all of us. But the Chicano experience it's a little different. I didn't grow up speaking Spanish at all. I don't have that bilingual background. And it's a direct result of the processes of colonization, conquest, and the policies that were created in New Mexico and southern Colorado. And so obviously I've worked to try and reclaim some of that, but for me, yeah, Chicano is an example of that reclamation.
This Danny, Ashley.
Thank you all. You're really great speakers. And I want to say, Jason, thank you for using that term. I'm a proud Chicana, live right here in Boulder, Colorado. I also want to say to Tania, thank you for being a chingona. It's a great way to be. Thank you all. And to the legal gentleman, very good job. Thank you for sharing that.
Good job. Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to acknowledge the wonderful mentors that are on the stage for our children to be able to see and the history. I also want to acknowledge Jason because I'm from Pueblo. And I was one of two, me and Roseanne Hernandez, who was in the honors programs, and they just tried to get us to go somewhere else. And I graduated from the University of Colorado Psychology Department, one of the first Chicanas in that program, in the PhD program. So, but I also wanted to talk about the importance of the leadership programs. And hopefully there's some financial support for that, because I think that is the entree for many of our younger students from across southern Colorado. I was born in Walsenburg, by the way, and roots to northern New Mexico. So I'm inspired by you, and the case is just amazing. And the work that you did, thank you so much.
Thank you all for the amazing talks. My question kind of goes around bilingual ed, so feel free for anyone to talk about it. But for Dr. Hogan specifically, thinking about multilingual education, and as a Latino myself, like I often fall into the tread of just assuming that's Spanish. But how do you see kind of us pushing further to think about multilingual education, especially for learners who are kind of lumped into a Spanish class? I just observed a classroom where it was 98% Spanish speakers and then one Vietnamese student, and she was lost like the whole time. So I guess what is like your take on that, and how do we support multilingual learners in multilingual classrooms when it's not a monolingual kind of aesthetic on the other side?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it goes back to the culturally sustaining practices. You have to know who's in your classroom. And so I think it's learning each child's an individual. And as Jason said, the history, just because they are Mexican, Latino, does not mean that they speak Spanish. There's different historical pieces that are connected to that. And especially now, we're getting immigrants from many, many different countries. And schools have, there's schools that have up to 70 languages within one school. And so again, it's back to strategies that are good for multilingual students, which those strategies are good for all students as well, and support. And so using visuals and again, changing storytelling, just infusing culture and language into everything that we do. But it is recognizing, that's part of being a good educator, is learning about your students, their history, their background, their experiences, allowing their language in the classroom so that you can learn that and not have, not know that there's a student in your classroom and you're teaching in Spanish and they're lost. You should not let that happen. And that goes back to knowing how to teach well and differentiate and scaffold. So,
I was just wondering, as a public high school teacher in the Denver area, and seeing people like Tim Hernandez in DPS kind of get forced out for his vocal support of his Chicano students, what are maybe your immediate hopes or fears for the future of bilingual ed in Colorado specifically?
We'll take it, let's do it together. I actually met Tim Hernandez, and he was hired at a school that valued what he's doing and teaching in, he teaches a class about protesting now. And so again, it's the same thing that we're saying about students. It's valuing the assets, especially the cultural assets that teachers have, and making sure you're putting those in, you're recognizing them. They weren't being valued in his space that he was in, and he had to find a different space to be able to do that and advocate. And he's doing a really good job and working for a principal that values what he does and put him teaching in a class that allows him to do what he loves. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with what Tanya's saying. And I think when we talk about this type of education, whether that's multilingual education or whether that's ethnic studies, the discipline that I come from, I think that these academic disciplines are looked at a certain way because they disrupt the traditional value system. These are studies, these are disciplines that value humanity above everything else. And I think that that's really at the core of the work that we do, that when we value humanity, when we value the people, right? yes, they are young people, but they are people who are coming into our classrooms. When we look at them as full, realized human beings who are still in that process of learning and developing, that completely changes the way that we engage with education. And that's one of the ways that I think, for me, I've seen that there are more educators now who want that than when I was in school, that's for sure. I have seen that there are teachers who are moving in that direction.
I think also just listening to what teachers are saying, as you're saying, and really following what their pursuits and their dreams are, and elevating teachers to be in those positions of leadership, to listen, is where we need to turn so that we can begin humanizing and changing our educational system to honor the complexity of languages and cultures and traditions and heritage that are in almost all classrooms. Thank you.
So we have time for one more question, and we're going to ask it to each. We're going to ask each one of you to answer it. So the question is, what are the next frontiers in the struggle for civil rights?
I don't think they're new frontiers. There's a saying that all politics is local. And let me change that around a little bit. I think all struggles are local. And they begin with the individual, and from the individual to the family, to friends, to community, and then the broader community. So from my perspective, it's all a question of, what do you want to see happen? What do you, as a local person, want to see occur, whether it be in the legal field or the education field? Give me good laws and I'll enforce them.
The frontier. Judge Gonzalez and I just got through discussing a case that's over 109 years old. Judge Gonzalez and I discussed a case that's over 109 years old. For me, the next issue is integration. We talked about segregation over a century ago. We are still struggling with that. And we keep on hearing about this resegregation trend. It's real, and as we move further into the future, we're heading towards a segregated society. Something has to be done about that.
So in terms of a frontier, I think it's, as you've both said, the frontier we're already marching on and have been in terms of racial and class-based progress over the last 150 years. And it's a struggle, it's a frontier that we need to keep moving on. And in particular, I think it's up to white folks to educate ourselves about these long histories of oppression and systems of inequalities that continue to disproportionately harm individuals and communities of color. And it's up to white folks to disrupt and to step up and be a co-conspirator. Get with the program.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have to agree with everything that's been said. I don't think any struggle that we are engaging with right now is brand new. Every one of the struggles that we're engaging with has previous iterations, and I think that for me, it always begins with education, both in and out of schools, because schools are not the only place where education happens.
And I would say we need more of a focus on coalition building and solidarity across groups. And systemic racism is deeply ingrained in our society and impacting like housing, employment, the criminal justice system, so many aspects, and we've got to work on that. I also think expanding civil rights protections for LGBTQ plus communities, people with disabilities, and then immigrants, especially documented and undocumented immigrants, is another area that we just have to work on expanding those basic civil rights.
So thank you all. Everybody sit tight because we have a little bit more, but thank you so much for your heartfelt thoughts, your inspirational words. And we have just a little bit for you. Yeah? So. So it's been wonderful being with all of you this evening, and we'd love to continue the conversation with you outside this room at our reception, which in just a few minutes. So please do join us for that. But before we finish, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the many, many people who helped make these Ed Talks tonight possible. Andy O'Connor, our speech coach and producer extraordinaire, who's actually doing all of this from Washington State. Grace Maniscalco, who handled everything from logistics to tech with her typical grace and fabulousness. Ichigo Takakawa and Hannah Fletcher, who oversee production, promotion, communication, moving the slides forward, pretty much everything. Tyler Caldwell and Ashley Gow, who kept things moving along tonight and keep us going forward. Tom Parkin, our extremely wonderful videographer, and the staff here at the Dairy who do such an incredible job for us and put up with us. So, and of course, we thank all of you who held space tonight for these amazing, amazing speakers and their stories. We are grateful for you, our audience, and our community for coming this evening. These talks will be available online in a few weeks on our School of Education website, and the entire event will be online for those who couldn't make it tonight. So we hope you found inspiration from tonight and that these stories will move you to action. So good night, and please join us.